You were talking about dating profiles. Do you have, you've done a lot of research in this area about what to do. So do you know where men go wrong with dating profiles and what they should do? Is it like photos? They all have fish or something? There's a lot of fish on Tinder.
I know it's okay. So a couple thoughts. So you'd mentioned before the study that I had cited about how so men tend to swipe right. They tend to like the profiles of more than 60% of the women that they encounter, whereas women only swipe right on 4.5%, right? So very, if, as a guy, it's very, very slim odds. So where they go wrong, the fish picture is interesting. I talked to one of the former product guys at Tinder, and he told me that actually fish pictures tend to do pretty well.
Welcome to episode 143 of the Mikhaila Peterson podcast. I'm Mikhaila Peterson. I have a very fun podcast for you good folks today. My guest, Rob Henderson, is a doctoral candidate at Cambridge University. Rob Henderson grew up in foster homes in California. He joined the Air Force at the age of 17. After serving, he attended Yale on the GI Bill and was subsequently awarded a Gates Cambridge Scholarship to study at the University of Cambridge. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Quillette, among other outlets, and coined the phrase luxury beliefs for the beliefs held by rich people, basically. Rob's great. We covered the dark triad of personality, psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. People encompassing dark triad traits are skilled at manipulation and making you fall in love with them, particularly if you're female. We discussed his concept of luxury beliefs, sexual attraction, dating apps in the time of COVID, Wokism and woke fishing, which is hilarious, the rise in self-censoring, writing, and more. Please be sure to subscribe if you enjoy this episode or this type of content. This episode was brought to you by NordVPN. NordVPN is the fastest VPN in the entire world. Also super legit for sponsoring me. You may not know all the ways NordVPN can protect you. Phishing sites, for example, can look just like the real thing. One careless click and poof, your data's gone. Hackers can then ask for ransom, and even then, you're not guaranteed to ever see it again. Seemingly normal websites can also infect your devices with malware unless you use NordVPN. NordVPN is undoubtedly the best in the game. Take it from someone who's been using VPNs for years to avoid Canadian Netflix. It works across all your devices as well. Take advantage of my exclusive offer today and see what full online protection really feels like. Grab your NordVPN deal today over at nordvpn.com/TMPP or use promo code TMPP for a huge discount off their premium plans, an extra free month, and a secret bonus gift. All with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Again, that's only at nordvpn.com/TMPP or promo code TMPP, the acronym for this podcast. Thanks for watching this episode. Rob Henderson, welcome to my podcast.
Hi, Mikhaila. Thanks. It's great to be here.
This is going to be a fun conversation. We're going to go through a bunch of your articles.
Sure.
I have a lot of questions. But before we get started, can you give a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
Yeah, sure. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge. I study social and evolutionary psychology. I've published in peer-reviewed articles, but I'm probably most well known for my popular writing. So I've written in Quillette, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, among other outlets. And I'm really interested in things like social status, social class, personality, the dark triad, which we might get into later, and yeah, sort of cultural and social commentary.
Okay, I think we should actually just start right off with the dark triad because that's really interesting. So can we start by can you give an explanation about what that means?
Yeah, so the dark triad is a personality constellation that encompasses three different traits. So the three traits are narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Narcissism is essentially entitled self-importance. Narcissism itself is fairly complex, and we can get into the sort of nuances there, but it is sort of, most people are familiar with what narcissism is. Psychopathy is callousness, cynicism, a sort of disregard for other people. And Machiavellianism is sort of a duplicity and the willingness to sort of exploit others for personal gain, a sort of cold, calculated mindset. And together, these three personality traits tend to go together in the same person. They all sort of correlate. So if one person scores high in narcissism, they tend to score fairly high in psychopathy and Machiavellianism as well. But there is some variation. You might be high in one and maybe not so high in the other, but they tend to go together.
How much of those just correspond to being disagreeable in the big five?
They're extremely highly correlated with the disagreeable, disagreeability in the big five personality traits. So there's been multiple studies on this, on which of the big five correlate with the dark triad. And of the big five, agreeableness is the most correlated, meaning negatively correlated. So the higher you are in agreeability, the lower you tend to score on the dark triad. But there's some variation too with the others. So if you're high on the dark triad, you tend to score a little bit higher on, for example, extroversion. If you score high on psychopathy, they tend to score a little bit high on openness, but the correlations are much weaker. It's really about agreeableness. If you're a dark triad person, you tend to be an extremely disagreeable person.
You said if you score higher on psychopathy, then you tend to score a bit higher on openness, but it's a weak correlation?
Yeah, it's a weak correlation.
Oh. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of your articles. Okay. So you wrote about the dark triad in Psychology Today and in Quillette. And I believe it was Psychology Today. Oh yeah. Dark personalities are more likely to signal victimhood. So that surprises me a bit because I always thought that it was more agreeable people that tended towards being victims, but that's not what this suggests.
Well, it's a little bit tricky. So that paper was a fascinating paper. I think it was published in 2020 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. A series of very interesting studies, and they weren't claiming. So the researchers were not claiming, based on the studies that they ran, that actual victims score higher on dark triad personality traits. What they were claiming is that people who tend to score high on dark triad personality traits tend to signal victimhood more. And signaling victimhood is not necessarily the same thing as actually being a victim, right? And so people who are truly sort of the targets of misfortune or suffering, who've really gone through bad things, those aren't the people who tend to be narcissists or psychopaths, but the people who tend to be narcissists and psychopaths will sort of exploit people's empathy and sort of exploit people's willingness to help suffering people by playing a victim. And so, of course, they ran the standard dark triad scales, sort of asking people various questions about how they interact with other people and how they move through the world, whether they tend to be cold and calculating and so forth, whether they're sort of believe themselves to be more important than other people. But then they also created a victim signaling scale. And it included items like, I tend to want to broadcast that people like me are sort of not as well known as we should be, or how, more people who are like me need to be represented in the media or in sort of the public conversation. Basically, like, they're put upon, they're sort of suffering in some way, and they tended to highly correlate. So the higher you are in dark triad, the more signaling you do in terms of victimhood signaling. So they also found some interesting, it wasn't just correlational studies. So they weren't just administering scales and finding that they tended to correlate. They were also doing experimental studies as well. Basically, in one of the studies, what they did was the psychologists rigged a game in which participants could win some money. But what the psychologist did was rigged it so that it was really easy to cheat, and it was really easy for them to figure out who cheated. And first, they had people play this game. They tracked who cheated in the game to win more money. And they also had these participants take the dark triad personality scale, and they found that the people who scored highly on this scale also were more likely to cheat to win more money at this game. They also did these interesting studies where they basically imagined the participants to envision themselves in a sort sort of an employment scenario. So they have a colleague at work who, and they're described as being a little bit unpleasant to be around, and maybe they don't like them very much, and so on. So this is the person they're imagining. But then the researchers asked the participants, how much do you agree with these items, these statements, like, this colleague insults you all the time, this colleague has taken advantage of you, and all of these things, this colleague has done bad things to you, this colleague needs to be fired. Nothing in the description of this person in this sort of scenario indicated that they had ever insulted the participant, that they had ever done anything wrong to them. But the scenario was like, this person, you just don't like them very much, right? And again, the researchers found that people who score high on dark triad are more likely to exaggerate or fabricate negative qualities about this other person and say how badly they've been treated by them.
Huh. I wonder if they actually believe that or not. Has there been any, is it full on lying? Is it to get somewhere, or do they switch that in their head so they think that they've been insulted?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's an interesting question, but I may not matter because the outcome is such that this is how they behave. And the researchers in that paper, they document how findings from insurance fraud claims, right? Like, some X number of millions or billions of dollars every year are lost because of people who are fraudulently filing insurance claim, people who claim that they can't seek employment. And so basically a lot of people will sort of exploit weaknesses in various systems in order to extract economic gain or whatever kind of gain happens to be. But, people who score highly on the dark triad, they tend to be more preoccupied with status, with sexual rewards, so material rewards, social rewards, sexual rewards, and whatever environment they happen to find themselves in, they will enact the strategies to extract those rewards. So if they happen to be, say, in the modern West in the year 2022, they might find that, the best strategy to extract rewards is to signal victimhood. And so that's what they'll do to sort of exploit the weaknesses in the system. But if they're somewhere else, maybe being an extreme narcissist might be the best way to do it. So they'll sort of lean into that. And that's the best way to get attention, to get romantic partners or whatever it happens to be. So they tend to be very good at sort of picking up on, what are the ways to maximize those rewards in whatever social environment they happen to be in.
Okay, so that's very interesting. But that type of person sounds like an unattractive type of person, right? Anyone who's signaling victimhood without actually being a victim. I don't think anyone finds that attractive. However, according to what you wrote, women are more attracted to people who score higher in these dark triad personality traits.
Yeah, well, that was a study, I want to say it was from 2015. This team of researchers, they had some women evaluate a man, basically his suitability as a romantic partner. And what they found is that men who score highly on the dark triad relative to an ordinary man, so an average guy versus a guy who's really high on the dark triad, they score the dark triad guy to be quite a bit more attractive. So one standard deviation more attractive than the average. And a standard deviation is a lot in psychological research, that sort of that gap. I'd imagine, I can't remember the specific details of how they sort of characterize this guy, this dark triad guy, but I'd imagine they weren't saying like he, talks about how he's a victim or whatever.
Yeah.
They probably talk about how he tends to be sort of superficially charming and maybe a little bit callous and uncaring and emotionally distant and these kinds of things. And something else I had written in that article, sort of summarizing a lot of this research, Justin Lehmiller, who's a sexual psychologist, wrote a book called Tell Me What You Want about sexual fantasies. And he writes about how the most fantasized about superheroes among women, the most fantasized superhero is Batman, which is an interesting contrast with the most fantasized superhero among gay men, which are Captain America and Superman. And I found that kind of that difference to be interesting, right? Because like Superman and Captain America are like these goody two shoes Boy Scouts, like these are the guys that little boys look up to as like the sort of like the the most pure and noble superheroes. And I think Batman is often seen as like this sort of darker, edgier, like almost like he's a villain, but he still does the right thing. But you could imagine him going to the dark side. And this is the guy that women, of all the superheroes, that's the one that they seem to like the most.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I never liked Captain America. It's like, that
what about
guy's
Superman?
Boring. Superman too. Well, Superman mostly because it's like he can do everything. So he's going to win.
Right.
It's like,
okay.
It's too old of a superhero. There's no weakness there. What's his I guess kryptonite's the weakness, but I mean, come on.
One thing I would be curious about, I don't have any research on this, but I don't know. Did you see that new James Bond movie, No Time to Die?
Is that the newest one?
The newest one with Daniel Craig. Yeah, it came out like a couple months ago.
Okay, no, I haven't. I really want to see that. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I thought it was good. It's not like the best James Bond ever, but I thought it was really good. But one of the things that's interesting about the Bond series is how like the earlier Bond movies were sort of more campy a little bit. There was a little bit more humor in them, but starting with the latest Bond with Daniel Craig, like the series took this more sort of darker, edgier turn, and the Daniel Craig Bond, he gets injured more. He's more vulnerable. He gets beaten up. You can sort of see the physical effects throughout the movie of him sort of becoming more and more damaged. And he himself is sort of a more edgy and rough character. And I would love to see, if there's any data on like maybe 30 years ago, whoever was Bond 30 years ago, how did women feel about that Bond versus the Bond today, and see like which James Bond is like the most appealing to women or to viewers in general.
Yeah. Or if that has changed, right? I mean, maybe it was the same percentage of women back then as it is now, but women now don't find that attractive.
Oh, that's a good point too. Yep. Yeah.
That's interesting. This episode was brought to you by Rabbit Air. I used to have real trouble getting quality sleep, but had no idea why. After ruling out a bunch of things like stress, it turned out I was allergic to dust in my room. So I got an air purifier and my sleep got better overnight. That was years ago. Now it's allergy season and I'm so allergic to Nashville, I can't be here. It's crazy. It's an allergy soup bowl and Rabbit Air is making it more tolerable. Plus, look, they put a lion on it, which is so cute. There it is. So cute. So cute. I'm very picky about what air purifiers I use. They need to be HEPA and they need to be good because I'm basically a bubble person. I'm not entirely sure why I even survived this long, to be truthful to you guys. But Rabbit Air has super clean, quiet, and very slick looking air purifiers that I can't recommend enough. Rabbit Air's award-winning purifiers use advanced filtration technology to target airborne allergens, particles, and even annoying smells that are hard to get rid of. Do yourself a favor and visit rabbitair.com today. They have a 5-year warranty, free shipping and returns, and a 90-day money-back guarantee on all their products. That's rabbitair.com for some of the best air purifiers you'll find out there, no matter where you look, and you can make them look super cute. You can even copy mine if you really want to, but I don't know if anybody wants to do that. But anyway, thank you to them for saving my lungs. I want to read it. There were a couple parts of one of these papers that I thought were really interesting. So I want to just read a few of them. We can talk about that. Okay. Ooh, this was dark. And I didn't actually know this. So the book, you're talking about David Buss's book, right?
Right. When Men Behave Badly, which is a great book. Yep.
Yeah, I need to talk to him. That would be really fun. Okay, so the book reports chilling research about predatory males. Researchers videotaped individuals walking down the same block in New York City. The tapes were shown to 53 prison inmates convicted of violent crimes. Inmates showed a strong consensus on who they would victimize. They chose individuals who moved in an uncoordinated manner with a stride that was too short or too long for their height. In another set of studies, researchers found an association between men's chosen targets and women's self-reported frequency of having been sexually victimized in the past. This suggests that women suffering from unwanted sexual encounters inadvertently emit cues that predatory males can detect.
Right. Yeah. I thought it was a very dark excerpt in that book too. And it shocked me because I had already known, just from reading a of the psychological research on dark triad that, again, they tend to sort of pick up on the cues and the signals for them to obtain what they want. But yeah, I would have never imagined that they could actually like sort of survey, a bunch of pedestrians walking and say like, oh, there's the vulnerable one. And it's almost like, what it makes me think of is like, when you see like National Geographic or whatever animal documentaries, and you see like the lion looking for like the gazelle that's like limping, the one that looks a little bit slower, smaller, more vulnerable than the others. And they're sort of like surveying which one of these should I go after. And that was sort of what it made me think here. And, I think there's probably some, I think it's a useful way to think about it. I've seen, for example, research papers on psychopathy who describe the gaze, like the way that psychopaths look at other people. They've described as reptilian. There's this sort of like animalistic quality to it that when people make eye contact for a long period of time with people who are emotionally vacant and who only see you for what you can provide to them or what they can extract from you. Apparently, a lot of clinicians and researchers describe this as a very sort of chilling experience. Like, wow, that you're looking into the eyes of someone who doesn't see you as a human being.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any use for this information? So for lack of a better term, for more agreeable men, I assume, are going to have a harder time attracting women because women are more attracted to these dark triad traits. Is there a way for people to kind of present themselves in a manner that embodies these traits without actually being a terrible person?
It's funny. I have a good friend of mine here at Cambridge. He's a criminologist, Vincent Harriman. He has coined this idea of the dark, I think he calls it the dark gentleman. And I may be getting some of the details wrong, but it's essentially this sort of this marriage between a guy who's maybe a little bit edgy and, ambitious and, can be maybe somewhat emotionally distant, but they know what they want. They're sort of using some of those qualities to pursue what they want while also sort of having a soft side to them, the sort of whatever, like the dad versus the cad, but sort of those two things put together. I suppose, yeah, I mean, people can cultivate and suppress various aspects of their nature. I mean, broadly speaking, in the personality research, our personalities, like the big five, they tend to be pretty stable throughout our lives. If you measure at age 18 compared to, 50 in your 50s or something, the correlation tends to be around 0.8. I mean, it's very stable, but that's sort of, looking in the aggregate scale, across many individuals across time. But as an individual person, you can sort of, and I'm sure people have experienced this, where you may want to, say, be more extroverted, in a social situation. Maybe you're more of an introvert, maybe you're more of a bookish type, but you want to make friends or you want to get promoted or something. So you sort of become more extroverted or pretend to be that way. And I think guys can do this too with maybe being slightly more disagreeable while, retaining some of the good guy traits. Speaking of extroversion, this reminds me of some interesting research on this too, that generally speaking, they report being happier when they behave in a more extroverted way. And this is not just true for people who score high on extroversion, but introverts too. If you tell introverts, if introverts are in a study and the researchers say like, go behave in a more social way, interact with more people, talk to more people today, introduce yourself to more people than you normally would, something like that. They actually report being happier than when they behave in an introverted way, when they sort of go against their impulses. Maybe they want to stay inside, but they force themselves to go out. And I find this interesting too, that sometimes, going against your own personality impulses can actually increase your sense of well-being.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. I have a theory that, okay, so if you're an extremely agreeable person, you can potentially kind of cram down whatever you're feeling so that you don't hurt anybody's feelings, right? Oh, I don't want to say that because this person might interpret it this way. And if they feel sad, I'm going to feel sad because I'm an agreeable person. I think that if people learn how to overcome that and actually say how they feel better. I think it might just be harder for agreeable people because they care more about other people's feelings. But that kind of thing, I think you can practice. And you're like, okay, you're concerned, you're going to say something, it's going to hurt somebody's feelings, but you should probably say it and you have that feeling in you. If you just do that and then you survey the outcome and you're like, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think if you practice that, you can get over that. And I think for men who are more prone to being agreeable like that, I think that's probably a good thing to practice in general, but also to make you more attracted to women.
Yeah. I think there's I mean, that's definitely, I think, a useful way to do it. And also, I mean, beyond, trying to whatever, like shape your personality in different ways or behave differently, you can also just sort of put yourself in places where people might be more attracted to a more agreeable man. So if maybe going out to I don't know, a nightclub or something is not the ideal place if you're more of, say, an agreeable or introverted kind of guy. But I don't know, religious services or libraries or something, like maybe they're more, women there might be more interested in a more agreeable kind of person. So definitely you can sort of put yourself in the right environment as well. But yeah, I mean, I think the dating question is fascinating just because I think it's just becoming more difficult for a lot of young people. Guys who are, they have good careers, they have good income, all those kinds of things. And some of them had to make it a second job, basically, of like reorganizing their lives in order to find a suitable romantic partner. I think it's getting pretty rough out there.
So what does that mean, reorganizing their lives?
Yeah. So like a friend of mine, for example, he, sort of changed the hours he worked at in order to go to cooking classes because he just figured, he likes to cook and he wants to meet, a person who would want to cook too. Sort of going to the gym at the right hours, just sort of generally changing his habits and introducing himself to more people, getting his dating apps. Like he had like a lot of input from different women and different people who could help him like portray, convey himself in the way that would maximize his chances of finding a suitable partner. And I think a lot of guys, they don't do this, they just sort of go through life and wonder what's going on. And other guys are realizing like, oh, it really is something you have to take seriously. It's not something that's just going to happen by accident for you. And I'm sure women are having in many ways the same kind of experience, but, just speaking from, most of my friends tend to be guys and this is sort of their experience. And yeah, it really is, they're spending hours a week on this project of how to find a girlfriend.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we could talk about that, but first, okay. So this kind of has to do with what you just said. This is from your article as well. Because of the increased risk women carry, they tend to be choosier about their partners. In contrast, men are less discerning. Studies of online dating, for example, find that most men find most women to be at least somewhat attractive. In contrast, women on average view 80% of men as below average in attractiveness. Another study found that on the dating app Tinder, men liked more than 60% of the female profiles they viewed, while women liked only 4.5% of male profiles. So this might be a problem that's way more prevalent for men. I didn't realize that 80% of men as below average. That's quite off.
It is. I mean, right, because, you would think like 50%, right? It's sort of like 50% above and 50% below, but to have 80% rated below is pretty, it's pretty grim. But this sort of reflects our innate evolutionary psychology. So a lot of evolutionary researchers essentially find that because men carry less risk for during sex, right? They're less likely, even if they have sex with someone, they're less likely to contract an STD than women are.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so, well, I mean, because men's like organs are on the outside, whereas women's are on the inside, and that sort of affects, the likelihood of contracting. But then also, of course, pregnancy itself is extremely burdensome. And you can imagine, it's already burdensome in the modern era, but you can imagine, 50 or 100,000 years ago in the ancestral environment where humans evolved, like getting pregnant for a woman was, it was a life or death experience in many, many cases. So, as a result of this, women have evolved to be much more selective about who they have sex with. They want a guy who sort of has, good genetic quality, but also a guy who sort of could take care of them and provide for them and all those things. Whereas for men, the risk was so minuscule and the potential gain of having a kid was so high in evolutionary terms, right? In terms of having more kids. And so for this reason, I once had this line. I said this on our mutual friend Chris Williamson's podcast. A couple of years ago now, which is basically that for men, the default when they evaluate women, the default is I would probably sleep with her unless there's some extraordinary reason why I shouldn't. And for women, the default is I definitely wouldn't sleep with him unless there's some extraordinary reason why I should. So we sort of start from different positions. It's not exactly accurate, but I think it gets at this intuition that guys are just less picky, at least when it comes to sex. With relationships, it's a little different, but for women, much more selective, again, because of that risk of pregnancy and so on that they tend to carry.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's good. That's a good line. Okay, so you were talking about dating profiles. Do you have, you've done a lot of research in this area about what to do. So do you know where men go wrong with dating profiles and what they should do? Is it like photos? They all have fish or something? There's a lot of fish on Tinder.
I know it's okay. So a couple thoughts. So you'd mentioned before the study that I had cited about how, so men tend to swipe right. They tend to like the profiles of more than 60% of the women that they encounter, whereas women only swipe right on 4.5%, right? So very, as a guy, it's very, very slim odds. So where they go wrong, the fish picture is interesting. I talked to one of the former product guys at Tinder, and he told me that actually fish pictures tend to do pretty well, surprisingly well. And we both thought it was funny because we're both aware that there's this sort of trope that people make fun of it, like, oh, the guy with the fish. But apparently, and I make fun of it too, but I mean, apparently if you have a fish picture, it does slightly increase the chances for a guy. I don't know about how much, but it's better than average. Other things that guys can do. So this is really interesting is having a dog. This is something that I think we all know. But it's actually a huge benefit to have a dog in your dating app picture. I think it's something like you're twice as likely, or it might have been like 60% as likely to be liked if you have a dog picture. If you have a cat picture, you're actually less likely to be liked by a woman. If you're a straight guy, so if you're a straight guy looking for a female partner, having a cat is detrimental. So don't have a cat. Apparently for gay men, it's a little different. I think gay men actually, they have a slight preference, I think, for guys who have cats. But if you're a straight guy, don't put a cat. Get the dog. One other thing that guys could do, and this is a little bit more involved and burdensome than just going out and asking your friend to borrow his dog for a picture, is continue your education. So there's research showing that basically what these guys did, these scholars did, they took a picture of the same guy, same profile, and the only thing that changed was whether he had a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And the guy with a master's degree got twice as many likes as the guy with the bachelor's degree. And so, if you're on the dating apps and you are, sort of serious about finding someone, then maybe getting a master's degree would be wise. I think a lot of people are going to listen to this and say, "I'll just put master's degree on there," but you should really get the master's degree. And it helps for women too, surprisingly. I think a lot of people are uncertain about the benefits of education for women's romantic prospects, but actually women who get master's degrees, they did the same study in the same set of researchers and found that women with a master's degree get around, I think, 10% more likes than women with a bachelor's degree. So it's a slight advantage. I don't know if it's enough, if it justifies getting the master's degree for 10% more likes, but it is a slight advantage for them. And then just generally, I've seen other. This isn't research, but this is just like opinions I've seen from women. that, sort of the bathroom selfie is terrible. Get like good pictures and those kinds of things. I found so there's some conflicting research here on social proof, which David Buss has researched and other things. So social proof is basically a lot of research finds that if a guy is in a picture with women, women who are observing the picture rate him as more attractive than when he's alone or with surrounded by guys. And the idea here is that like, oh, well, if these women, especially if these are attractive women, are willing to, be around this guy and tolerate this guy, then, there's probably something interesting about him or something appealing about him. So they'll rate him as more attractive. But then when it comes to dating apps, guys who post pictures of themselves on their apps surrounded by women, they tend to get fewer likes than when they're alone or than when they're with guy friends. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. I think one reason for this might be that, like, women may not necessarily be super interested. Like, I think the picture may convey that like this guy is unserious, or that he just wants to like have, short-term relationships, one night stands. He just wants to have flings. And that's why he has these pictures with all these women. He's just, I think it gives maybe the wrong vibe. But this is, I don't actually know. It's just speculation. Like, why do you think this would be?
Yeah, well, probably. I mean, if I looked at that, I'd think, especially if the women were attractive, I'd think, okay, that's potentially competition. And if you're on a dating app already, you're like, I just won't even get into that. I think it's probably that is like, maybe that's competition. Or if you want to think deeper about it, well, why is he showing other women on his dating profile? Right. But I'd say competition probably if it's attractive women. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah. So that mismatch was intriguing to me. I mean, in real life, there's other research showing, what guys can do to maximize their attractiveness or to increase, their appeal. There was research, for example, showing that a guy who carries around, so they basically had the same guy, he would approach women carrying a guitar case, this case in the shape of a guitar, and he would ask women, he'd sort of start a short conversation and then ask for their number. And he approached some number of women doing it with the guitar case. And then he did the same thing, a few days later with different women with nothing, just sort of carrying nothing, just being, regular. And so when he had the guitar case, he got many more phone numbers. And I'd wondered, I've never seen any research on this. I don't know of any even anecdotal stories, but, if you're a musician, have some, carrying a guitar or some kind of instrument, I think that might be advantageous. Probably depends on the instrument. Like if you're carrying around a tuba, I don't know how that's going to go.
A flute or
clarinet. Yeah. Clarinet. I mean, maybe with the clarinet, I don't know. Probably not the flute or the tuba. Yeah.
I don't know. So what would be the most attractive instruments, do you think? So, I mean, probably, guitar, but like how a piano, like how would a piano look?
Saxophone might.
Saxophone. Oh, right. Yeah, there is. Yeah, the sort of jazz and okay, I can see that. Drums. How do you think women would see a guy with drums?
Oh, I'd probably wondering why they were carrying them all.
Well, not carrying, but like playing. What I mean is like if you're on the apps and you're sort of seeing or like on a website or something, and you see a guy playing the drums. I think like that might be, I think some women would find that. No, I think that
works. I think anything in a band like that, a guitar, a bass, drums, anything like that would work. Didn't one of the Kardashians just, and I could have this wrong because I don't really follow the Kardashians, but isn't one of them dating, this is a terrible story. That like rock guy who plays the drums. Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. I need to know this. Travis Barker. Doesn't he play the drums?
Right. I mean, the name rings a bell.
He's a drummer. There we go. I know things. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Kourtney Kardashian dating Travis Barker, the drummer. So there you go. There's an example.
All right. Yeah. I think, okay. So the drum. That'll be, that could be added to the list, learn an instrument. Maybe, I'm thinking of others. So those are sort of all of the empirically based suggestions that I have, but I'm thinking of others like maybe cooking, if you're seen in a kitchen and you're cooking or making some elaborate meal or something. I think some of these would actually be worth studying beyond just, beyond the sort of usual, like the dog picture or something, more education, but like actual hobbies and activities, which I think a lot of guys already know, right? Like I think you'll see pictures of guys who post, like outdoors pictures or skydiving, or I think all of those. I mean, it's really interesting. I hope that there are some researchers out there who are looking into this about like, what personality qualities is someone conveying when they, when they have the skydiving picture. I think
openness.
I think openness, maybe extroversion. Yeah. Probably low neuroticism or high emotional stability.
I bet it's that. I bet it's that for something like skydiving. Yeah.
Yeah. You're sort of showing like courage and the absence of anxiety. Yeah. I mean, so I've gone skydiving and bungee jumping actually, and I didn't find skydiving that scary. I think bungee jumping is much more terrifying, but I think most people associate skydiving with more terror. So maybe that's a better picture.
How was the landing? I wanted to go skydiving, but I have like a fake hip and a fake ankle. And I figured that if something broke, people would just be like, yeah, maybe don't do that.
Oh, well, okay. So the first, like, I don't know, however many times you go skydiving, you do like a tandem jump. So you're actually attached to like a professional skydiving instructor.
When you land?
Yeah. So you're attached the entire time. And so like they basically are like telling you like, when to put your feet up, like how to do it, when to land and so on. I don't know if it would be, because I know that you have some, health conditions and stuff. I don't know if that would be worth risking though. It could be pretty tough. I didn't have a problem with it, but I could imagine like if one little thing goes wrong or like the wind blows at the wrong time or something, maybe it would be, but you'd have to talk to a professional skydiving instructor to get the deets on that.
They're just straight up going to say no though. Like, it's just like, no, definitely not you. Oh, well.
Well, you can go you can go bungee jumping then, I'll put that on your, your webpage or whatever, your app page, because I think it looks cool. Like, I mean, I have some pictures. This was years ago. So I went skydiving in 2009 before all this, the dating app stuff had taken off, but, I still managed to get some cool pictures of jumping off the bridge and stuff. And I'm like, that's a cool picture. So
that'll work.
Yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Do you know any of the stats about what's changed during COVID for dating apps? Like, has dating app use gone up because everyone's isolated, or is everyone actually isolated and scared of dating now? Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't have any stats about whether it dropped. I mean, my guess is, at least for the first couple of months of the pandemic, probably there was sort of reduced use. But then, like, just anecdotally, just from like talking to my friends, a lot of my friends who are single, and especially my friends who are younger and still in college, it seemed like, there was like a brief like 8-week period of, let's, be careful. And then they stopped. And I mean, I had a friend who, so he worked at a consultancy. He was right out of college in 2020. He went on furlough, which is basically like, they're paying him 20% to not work anymore, because they were sort of reshuffling, reorganizing, whatever. And so they paid him 20%. He took a 6-month furlough, and he said for 6 months straight, all he did was go on the apps and bring a different person over to his house every day to have a date and whatever else. So he did this for 6 months straight, basically throughout the entire, lockdown. And this was in the US. And yeah, he was telling me, it was funny. He's like, I was so grossed out with myself during that period. But I was bored and had nothing else to do because I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And all I had was the apps, and that was my entertainment. Yeah, he ended up going on like this religious retreat in Israel as a way to like cleanse himself of like all of his sins or all of the stuff that he had done. He felt a little bit repulsed about like just what he had. And so then he was like, I'm going to turn over a new leaf. I'm deleting the apps. I'm never going to do this again. And then he comes back from Israel, and then he said like within a week he downloaded all the apps again. He was doing the same thing. And all my other guy friends are telling me the same stuff, like I think the people who actually had the best time, if you can call it that, were people in relationships, like people who already had a party. They were just sort of chilling at home, like whatever, watching Netflix and hanging out or whatever. And like the people who were, trying to figure out the dating apps and like whether or not to put, like, I think Tinder had this special feature for people who were vaccinated to like signal that they're vaccinated. And there's like a bunch of interesting ways that guys interact with the apps. I don't know if you've heard of, you know about woke fishing?
Okay, let's get into woke. I think I've peripherally heard of woke fishing, but what is that?
Well, so you've probably heard about catfishing, right? Catfishing of
Yeah.
like pretending to be someone else on the internet, on social media or whatever. But woke fishing, it was this thing. There were a couple of articles about it, I think in Vice and the New York Post. Basically, men pretending to be progressive to get laid. And so they would put like, something in their Tinder bio, like, they'd put Black Lives Matter or, climate change reform now or something like that. And they would just sort of pretend to do this. But there were these stories of like guys doing this, putting this, and then they go on a date with a girl. And then later on, the women who are writing these stories about this, they'd go home with a guy and find like books by Ann Coulter on the bookshelf or like a MAGA hat, like stashed away in the closet or something.
Or he listens to Joe Rogan. Yeah.
He has So he has the, Joe Rogan app on his phone or something, or the Spotify app with Joe Rogan. And so I think like, a lot of guys were sort of like trying to figure out how to, get the attention of women and get their interest. And, Jeffrey Miller, the evolutionary psychologist, he's described this as political peacocking. Like the animal, the peacocks, right? Like they puff up their feathers to get the attention of the peahens. And he basically drew this analogy of like guys, broadcasting how they care about, XYZ political issue as a way to sort of, demonstrate, their moral feathers of how good and how noble and pure they are. And women might be, some women might be interested in guys like that. So, yeah, but those kind of guys are probably not, they're probably not very honest. Well, they're definitely not honest, but they may not be the kind of guys you want to be around for very long if they're willing to lie about who they are.
Score high on the dark triad, probably.
Right.
Huh. That's interesting. I wonder when some of these kind of ideologies spread, I wonder what percentage of people are like that. Right. And then once it gets popular, they're like, okay, well, this is what makes me popular. It's almost like I don't know, an evolutionary mechanism, right? If something takes over and you're like, okay, well, stay alive, I've got to be part of the crowd, I'll just go along with it. I wonder what percentage of the population an idea has to hit in order for that to happen. It's definitely happened, I would say, now with woke culture.
Yeah, I mean, there's some research showing that if 10% of the population comes to like hold an idea very vehemently and very stridently, and they are inflexible in their opinions, they're unwilling to be moved, then that idea does tend to proliferate, simply because the rest of the 90% of the culture, they either tend to have, like, even if they have opposing opinions, they may not hold them very strongly. And basically, if you have 10% of the population who really believes in their ideology and 90% who, they believe what they believe to varying degrees, but generally they're more flexible, then the smaller group will tend to, their ideas will tend to proliferate, right? I mean, it just makes sense. If one group's flexible and the other group is inflexible, the inflexible group is going to exert dominance over the more flexible group.
That's crazy. 10% is not very high. I would have assumed it had to be higher than that. I get the inflexibility part, but 10% is not very many people.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, a good example of this would be what you're describing here with, the woke culture and a lot of these, I've called some of those ideas, I've called them luxury beliefs, which tend to be held by a very small percentage of the population, tend to be, disproportionately educated and affluent. And, most people don't agree with a lot of this stuff. I mean, like the defund the police and all this kind of stuff, like the vast majority of the population thinks it's utterly insane. But, the rest of the population, they maybe don't have as much influence, or they don't spend as much time interacting with politics or whatever. And so a lot of policies can get pushed through that the majority of the country doesn't necessarily agree with.
Luxury beliefs. Has anybody gotten you in trouble for that?
Nothing, surprisingly little. I haven't had any issues with it. I've written about it multiple times, and tweeted about it a lot. I mean, it's funny, like when you're in academia and when you're a PhD student and research and whatever, like you come up with all these ideas, and some of the ideas that you work really hard on, no one cares about, and then like an idea you spent 10 minutes on will suddenly take off. And that was kind of like that with luxury beliefs. It was just a term that popped into my head, and it's just the way I define it is ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while inflicting costs on the lower classes. And so defund the police is an obvious example, but I think there are some others as well. And yeah, it's the whole like inflexible, like small population exerting their will over the others. I think like what I was seeing as an undergrad, I went to Yale, and here at Cambridge, I'm seeing like very sort of affluent and well-to-do people who hold opinions that are way different from ordinary people, middle-class people, working-class people. But those are the ideas that get attention in all of the sort of legacy media outlets and stuff. And, this is probably why they're, to some degree, at least one reason why they're so upset with, podcasters and people who are more independent and people who have interesting guests on, people like you, people like Rogan and so on, is that like, they only want their people to get attention and audiences.
What's it like being at Cambridge if you're not like, how's Cambridge doing in regards to being woke or not?
It's not as bad as like some of the, top universities in the US, but it's still like pretty bad. Your dad was disinvited from here a couple of years ago, which infuriated me. Because I was really looking forward to having him here. I mean, part of the reason why I applied to Cambridge was because of his influence. Why I applied to grad school was because of watching some of your dad's work and some of his videos. And so, there is like an activist contingent here, but it's lately it seems to have cooled down somewhat. You and your dad were here pretty recently, and there wasn't too much of that stuff going on. But I try to keep my head down. I've had like private conversations actually with professors here who've said like, I'm surprised you haven't had more, like more people haven't tried to come after you or something. And I'm like, it's weird because on the one hand, I feel like I haven't said anything that bad or anything that wrong. Like whatever, I have like pretty moderate opinions, I think. But on the other hand, I sort of get what they're saying because, being a moderate in certain environments, like you're perceived as, crazy extremist or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's, so one of the articles, it's kind of what we've been talking about. I want to read one thing, maybe more than one thing. Oh, but it's people being afraid to talk nowadays. So this was scary, and I didn't know this at all. But you wrote, results from a recent paper titled Keeping Your Mouth Shut, Spiraling Self-Censorship in the U.S. says they find that self-censorship has skyrocketed. In the 1950s, at the height of McCarthyism, 13.4% of Americans reported that they felt less free to speak their mind than they used to. In 1987, the figure had reached 20%. By 2019, 40% of Americans reported that they did not feel free to speak their minds. And then this isn't a partisan issue either. The percentage of Democrats who are worried about speaking their mind is just about identical to the percentage of Republicans who self-censor, 39 and 40% respectively. That's insane. 40% of people are worried about it. Compared to McCarthyism too?
Yeah. Yeah, it's right. So in the 1950s, during McCarthyism, it was 13% of Americans said they don't feel free to speak what's on their minds. And, the most recent survey, like you said, is around 40%, regardless of political party, which I find interesting. I can see that going sort of, like whereas the political difference is interesting. I think part of it is just if you're a Democrat, right? Like I think a lot of people believe that, maybe if you're a Democrat, you should have a little bit more flexibility or freedom because you tend to agree with whatever the prevailing ideology is or something, at least in the sort of sociocultural context. And, I think a lot of them, like I have close friends who are Democrats, and they're actually like kind of, they walk on eggshells. They're careful with what they say. I think a lot of this stuff, I've written at length about how much of the cultural trends and the fashions we're seeing. It's a little bit political, sure, but I think it's much more about class. I was raised, I grew up in a working class town in California. I was raised by Democrats who didn't go to college, who were more working class, and who, when I visit them now, it's like, they're still centrist Democrats. When I grew up, they were John Kerry supporters in 2004, but they're just so disconnected from a lot of the cultural stuff that more educated people talk about. Like, it really is a sort of class-based thing. They'll casually make like sweeping stereotypical remarks about gender. And they speak in a way that would actually make college-educated Republicans uncomfortable, right? About like,
that's interesting. I wonder what percentage of the population just isn't paying attention to this.
I think a lot more than we know.
I'm a Democrat. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that because most people don't subscribe to any news media outlet. They don't really consume or keep up with a lot of this stuff. It is very much a sort of upper middle and upper class thing, right? If you go to college and, you're just of course supposed to, stay informed or whatever. I mean, when I first entered university, I was just shocked at how important people seemed to believe it was to like read the latest op-eds and articles and all this sort of updates on vocabulary and all these trends and stuff that was totally checked out from before. But the self-censorship thing, something else that was interesting about that, I don't remember if I put it in that article or not, I've written about it elsewhere, is that it's correlated with education, such that and this is perhaps linked to people who are Democrats but they just don't know what's going on, right? Is that or they're sort of not keeping up with the trends or something as much as educated people. So non-college educated people, it was something like only, if I'm recalling the numbers correctly, they may be a little off, but they're basically around 20% of high school graduates. So people who highest level of education, they were in college, around 20% say they self-censored. And then it was like, something like 30% or 35% of college grads. And then for postgraduates, it was like more than half, something crazy like that. So basically, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to self-censor. And I think...
Is that... Okay, sorry. Is that partly because I know that there's a correlation between... Maybe there's not a correlation, but people say that the smarter you are, the more you know what you don't know. Do you think it has anything to do with that, or is it being educated in an ideological fashion?
Well, that's interesting. I could imagine it perhaps being the result of both of those things. But again, like the more you know what you don't know, that indicates that you're sort of intellectually humble, that you're, sort of open-minded or something. But this specific question is about, do you not speak what's on your mind? So this is actually, these are thoughts and opinions that you already hold. Are you willing to express them? And it seems that the more education you have, the less willing you are to express yourself. It seems to indicate that the more educated you are, the less open-minded you think the people around you are. And so maybe it actually is at odds with this notion that the more educated you are, the more you don't know what you know, or you know what you don't know, or something like that. And so, yeah, I think this is fascinating too, that actually the most educated people, it's almost the reverse of what you would expect. And I think the researchers in that paper I cited, they say something like there is this gradual sort of cultural awareness that, like, as you obtain more education and sort of rise in socioeconomic status, you sort of learn that you're supposed to keep your mouth shut in certain instances, and you're not allowed to say certain things, and you have to be careful and walk on eggshells. And it's just that part of the reason why I wrote that entire article was because of how shocking I found that, because I had grown up thinking it was the reverse, that the more education and earning power and just sort of the higher socioeconomic status, the more freedom you'll have. But at least in this sort of social context, it's actually the reverse. It's the less freedom you have, or at least the less freedom you feel to speak what's on your mind.
Wow. Well, I bet there are a number of reasons for that. That's strange.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. What got you interested in all of these different topics?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a pretty curious person, but again, I came from quite a bit of a different social background than a lot of the people that I went to college with. So I actually grew up in foster homes in Los Angeles, and then I was adopted later into a working class family in Northern California.
How old were you when
And
that happened?
I was 7. I was almost 8 when I was adopted. So my biological mother came to California from the U.S. or came to California from South Korea. Sorry, when she was a young woman, and when I was 3, she became addicted to drugs, and so yeah, I never knew who my father was, and so I spent the next 5 years or so in foster homes around L.A. and yeah, and then moved to Northern California, and yeah, it was just sort of economically and socially too, sort of in terms of my family structure. I mean, just very challenging for me as a kid growing up. I was actually a really bad student, just totally checked out just because my home life was such a mess. And so, I joined the military right out of high school when I was 17.
Wow.
And mostly,
I know nothing about you.
yeah. We talked a little bit when you were here, but I think we were both very busy and there was a lot going on. But yeah, I was in the military and did an enlistment, served mostly. I was actually overseas for most of it. I was in Germany, did a couple of deployments to the Middle East, and it was from there that I went to college as a slightly older, like a mature student. And so I think all of those experiences together, combined with my probably innate curiosity, led me to be interested in, why people are the way they are. Why are there these like odd class differences in how people carry themselves and their opinions and their beliefs, and like what's going on with the dating scene, and all of these things have been, it's just been all super interesting to me.
Are you going to write a book? What are your plans?
Yeah, I'm writing a memoir actually about my sort of experiences in foster care and what life was like growing up in my dusty working class town in the late 90s and early 2000s, and how I came to end up in these sort of fancy universities, and what I've learned and all those kinds of things. So yeah, that's my project now, is the memoir.
When is that? When do you think you're going to wrap that up? When is it going to be published? I know there's big delays now for printing, so.
Yeah. I mean, so I have the manuscript done. I'm working on revisions right now with my editors at Simon & Schuster, sort of going back and forth on certain things and, trying to, whatever. So probably late this year, I'm thinking. So that's my goal, is to have it on track, because I'll be finishing up my PhD program here at Cambridge, probably like late summer, early fall, somewhere around there. And then if the book came out, right around that time or a little bit after, I think that would be ideal. If I wanted to go on a book tour or to deliver talks or whatever, to sort of promote the book and share all the stuff that I've learned.
Okay, that's very cool. That's very cool.
You should have me back on to talk about it.
Oh, I will, for sure. For sure.
I'll send you a copy.
Be good. Yes, please. Did you have trouble, like, I assume writing about foster care and some of these experiences is like heavy, right? And I know I've been trying to write about some of the stuff that I went through, and I find that when I wrote it down, I wrote too much, almost like the stuff that was heavier, there was like too much detail.
Yeah.
So did you have any issues writing out hard topics?
Are you writing a memoir, Mikhaila?
Yeah. Okay,
cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to reading that too. And yeah, so I've never actually talked about, the writing experience on a podcast before. So this is kind of cool. I mean, it was hard. I mean, I had written about a lot of this stuff even before the book. So the way I even landed this book deal was I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in 2018. It was like a 900-word summary of my life, basically. It was titled "Why Being a Foster Child Made Me a Conservative," and
okay. I can see that being popular.
It was popular. It was a little bit controversial, but not as controversial as I'd expected. But then like that was the thing that got the attention of, literary agents and publishers and stuff. So I had some experience writing about my life before, but like getting into like the granular details of it, it was hard. I mean, it was actually, it was hard enough to the point where if I had known how hard it was going to be, I wouldn't have done it. Just because like of the emotional exhaustion and the time and the like reenacting all of it, because I tried to write each chapter from the perspective of myself at that age. So if I'm 7 years old in a foster home, I tried to remember what was it actually like there? What do I remember? Who was around? What was school like? All those things. And it was really exhausting. I don't know if that was even the best way to do it, but that's the way I chose to do it. And I ended up writing more than I needed as well. I mean, I think the contract called for like 80 to 90,000 words, and I ended up writing more than 100,000. But, in my case, I mean, you probably are aware of a lot of this too, but I sent it to a bunch of different people, writers and people that I respect, and asked them for feedback and I asked them all actually the same set of questions. Like, what did you like about the book? What did you dislike? What was your favorite part? What was, your least favorite or less less engaging part, and so on. And, I was trying to get, what psychologists sometimes call when they do their research, inter-rater reliability, which is like, do all people agree on something essentially? And if, out of those 10 people, if a handful of them or some number of them said like this part was a little boring or dull, or I didn't get it or whatever, I either changed it or removed it. And after, going through that process a couple times, I whittled it down to get it within that word count. I try to keep in mind, this idea that, I've read this from multiple different authors actually, that the worst thing a book can be is boring. And so, if any part of the feedback I got was like, oh, this was a little bit slow or something, I'm like, all right, I got to change it or remove it.
Yeah. Interesting. Did you find that we can get into this more too when we actually when I actually read your book, when you come back on, but did you find that some of the harder things you wrote about, you had better memory of?
Yeah. I some of them, yeah. Some of them I did have a better memory of. Some of them, I think the bittersweet memories were the ones that I had the easiest time recalling and writing. Those are the ones that have stayed with me. But there were some really intense negative memories as well. I write about, for example, when I was first adopted, I was adopted by a married couple, a man and a woman, and their young daughter, who was their, biological daughter, who became my adoptive younger sister, who's younger than me, 3 years younger. And so I remember like when I moved in with them and how happy I was to like, say the words mom and dad and like, oh, like I have a mom and I have a dad now and I don't have to, and my sister, I remember like it somehow I had internalized the fact that because all of the foster homes I had lived in, either I was always moving or my foster siblings were always being taken. Right. Like I would make a bond with one of my foster siblings and then they'd go back to their parents or they go to another home. And so I was never sure who would be leaving and when. But when I realized that my sister and I, neither of us were ever going to be taken from each other, like I distinctly remember that feeling and writing about it. And then also when she gave me some toys, because all the foster homes I lived in, I never had any toys. And so when my sister gave me some toys, like, it was confusing to me because I had never had that experience before of a kid giving or anyone giving me toys. But the fact that this little, like younger than me, this little kid is giving me toys is like confusing, but also like, it sort of cemented our bond together. And so like those kinds of memories, it was at the time happy, but in hindsight, it's actually kind of sad. Those were the kind of memories that I remember the most.
Wow. This is going to be a crazy book. This should do well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Part of, have you felt better since kind of finishing the manuscript? Does it feel like that like resolved anything, or you got some of this emotional, I don't know, trauma out?
Yeah, I mean, well, I hated the process of writing it actually.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, are you, how far along are you?
So I have 170,000 words, and I
Whoa.
haven't covered the last 2 years. And the
Okay.
last 2 years were awful. Last three years. So I need to get rid of, like, I'm sure it's all just like there's too much going on there. So I need to cut like half of it.
That's a sturdy
It's
memoir.
sturdy,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a thick one. 170,000 words, man. Um, but like I'm like, how long have you been at the process?
Because dad always taught me to write out, traumatizing memories, right? So I actually started writing after I had my hip and ankle replaced when I was 18. So I had that done when I was 17. So I started writing through these when I was 18. So I've been doing this since I was 18. I really focused on making it into a book when I was 23, but then things got so weird that I was like, well, I can't end it here. I feel like I can end it now though. But so I've been doing this for years, and it's been, pretty grueling. The last part's
Okay.
really grueling.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, yeah. I mean, just from what little I know and have heard, I mean, I can imagine. I mean, but at least it sounds like you had some of it already sort of prepared, and yeah, so it wasn't
And
like
like the stuff from when I was a kid too, like that I'd gone through so many times that it was easier.
right. Yeah. For me, it was. I mean, I had like notes and just like scraps and ideas and stuff that I've accumulated over the last few years. Um,
Ah,
but it
okay.
wasn't, it was like literally I had to like write, 90,000 words in 18 months or something. And so I had like targets to set for
Wow.
myself of, whatever, 300 words today or X number of words tomorrow. And, if I can get this many words by this date, then it's fine. But then like, once the like first draft was done, I did feel a lot better, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe it's over. And then like the fact, like, I mean, when I was able to end it in a way that I liked and that was satisfying, because memoirs are weird, right? Because it's like your life is still going. There's no like real end.
Yeah.
But how do you make a satisfying conclusion to all of the themes that you've discussed, and make it satisfying for the reader too, not just for yourself? And once I got there, I think I was like, oh, fine. And I'm like, God, I'm so done with this thing. And I'm actually not done, because I'm still going through edits and revisions, but at least the sort of the marble block is there. Like, chip away at it. But yeah, it's it's a weird process. And I'm kind of glad I'm doing it, and I'm glad I'm done. But it's not something I would have agreed to had I known what it was going to be like. I don't know how you feel. I mean, it sounds like you're having a different experience with yours.
Yeah, well, I kept a diary since I was in grade 1. So
Okay.
I just had so many details that I don't think I would have remembered otherwise. So it's difficult for me to say, like, this really doesn't matter. Like, part of these things just don't matter. So I'm at the point where I need people to go through it and think and go, whoa, like, there's way too much detail there. Or like, no one cares about this.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked to my sister, so I mentioned my adoptive sister, asking her what she remembers. I talked to like, friends from high school I haven't talked to. I mean, now it's been, 13 plus years since I've talked to some of my friends from high school, and asking them like, do you remember that, like trying to get the memories right, or at least as right as possible. But it's really weird, like writing memories, because so for example, I talked to my mom, my adoptive mom, about a conversation we'd had when I was 9, and I told her like, oh, do you remember that time we were in a car outside of this house and you told me about XYZ, and I did this, and like, whatever, and I'm describing this to her, and she was like, we weren't in a car, like we were at a different house on someone else's porch. It wasn't nighttime, it was like early morning, like, just like the basic detail, like the basic part of it is right, but all the details I got one of us got wrong, or maybe we're both wrong, right? And that part is hard for me to like reconcile, that like, okay, so we have different recollection of when that conversation took place and what was going on around us. And so like, like every other memoir, you always have to put like, these are true, at least as I remember it. But of course, like no one can truly verify some of these things,
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to when that comes out. Definitely send me a copy. We'll talk about it.
When's yours coming?
Well, I wasn't willing to finish it until there was a good ending. Like you said, it's weird because it's your life. And my dad was so sick for so long that I was just like, I can't, like, it's just this like depressing, autoimmune, chronically ill child. And then I get better and then her dad gets sick and then it ends. I was like, that's not going to work. I was like, I'll just wait until dad gets better, assuming that's going to happen. And he's better now. And things are like, it seems more conclusive. So I've just been so swamped with everything else. It's hard to like, I've got a book deal, but it's hard for me to, there's not enough pressure. And so I haven't been like, I've got like my dad's brand and then I have the podcast thing. So I haven't been like just half an hour a day, right? I haven't got to that. Plus I think I needed to process some things. I'm probably almost ready for another sprint.
Yeah. I mean, it was surprisingly, like the processing of it and sort of like mining through all of those emotions and stuff. Like, I don't think of myself as a particularly, I took your dad's personality test and I scored in like, I don't know, like the bottom 10th percentile on neuroticism or, just like really I'm just not that emotional, but that process was like surprisingly, brought up a lot of feelings and stuff. And it's a crazy experience. Just, trying to relive your life in the span of a couple of years again, so.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Okay, Rob, if people want to find you online, where should they go?
You can go to my website, robkhenderson.com, or follow me on Twitter at robkhenderson.
Okay. We'll link all those below too.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming on. I'll have you back for your book. That'll be fun. Maybe.
Thanks, Mikhaila.
I don't know. It'll be interesting anyway.
Yeah. It'll be an interesting discussion. And thanks, Mikhaila. This is great.